For the budget meeting.
Mr. Seminaro. Mrs. Hamill.
Here.
Mr. Kurtz. Mr. McCullough here. Mr. McLaughlin.
Here.
Mr. Potts.
Here.
Mr. Shalhoub.
Here.
Mr. Wolf. Here. And Mr. Basil.
Here. Okay, I guess to start off, the administration has given us a couple pieces of information in the last week or so. Were there any questions? Actually, what we'll do is just run through some of the additions to the overall summary. Ms. Penza? In terms of what you sent out last week, I think there was a couple of additions we put on there. Medical plan changes, professional staff, which increased expenses about $4,800.
That's just, I'm just updating as we go along if somebody has a child or if they just change their plan. So our costs are going to go up for next year.
Okay. Then we had a reduction due to extracurricular stipend adjustment based on the 11-12 approved coach.
There was a coach approved on the last agenda, so as soon as they're approved, I'm carrying the changes forward. And that was a reduction of $865. And you'll have that again with the coach that's on tonight, as well as some things that are on the agenda for the end of the month.
Gotcha. Okay.
But until they're approved, I don't carry them forward.
Right. All right. And reduction due to custodial termination, no replacement. So I guess we have a custodial staff that's retiring.
Actually,
yes, it was in the.
Yep. Okay. And that
resignation.
It was a resignation. Yeah.
But that one is being replaced.
That one's being replaced.
I got it. So net was $54,000 savings to the school district. And then the last one here, I just want to confirm this. This says reduction in class size, parity of program curtailment. Is this the one FTE?
That is correct. I did not have the figure for last time.
That we didn't have the figure for last time. That's approximately $63,000 savings to the school district. So, and then on the flip side, we refined the reduction in the activity fees. Ticket sales, instead of being around 26, it's 25.8. I think we guesstimated around $26,000, so it's a reduction in income by about $25,800. And we have the Commerce Bank agreement in there, the estimated income of about $20,000, and we moved the $790,000 over from the project capital funds to defease the bonds. That pretty much summarizes everything, right?
Correct.
Okay. Did anybody have any questions on those items? Okay.
So just a question, then you just, it seems like our sheet is written, that deficit of 1.2 seems pretty similar. Do you just keep adjusting the bond fund and keep it there, or do you just keep subtracting it out, leaving the placeholder as is?
Well, I thought I was told at the last meeting to take the 1.5 of the fund balance placeholder, take the 790 out of that, then it was 710.
Okay. Again, I'm not saying you didn't. It was 2 weeks ago.
That was in my
notes. Very slowly as time goes on.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So we're still in a $1.2 million deficit. Okay. I guess some of the questions I had asked. One of the questions I had asked, and maybe I can defer this to curriculum instruction, there's members on there as well. I was looking at one of the old, and Dr. Otto sort of tried to explain this to me last week when I called about it. I was looking at a document that you guys had discussed in curriculum instruction from the high school last year.
Yes.
Which dealt with, and it's just a spreadsheet, and it shows the departments, all the courses, the periods, the teacher that teaches it, the number of students, and the number of seats open, and then the number of days a week, I guess, that the...
Yeah, I mean, taken out of context, it looks good, but in context, number of open seats mean theoretically the number of seats that could be put into each of those sections. If you look at it that way alone, just sheer numbers, yeah, you look like you can move, but if you were to look, and we did look at this, if you were to look at, say, just algebra, it looks like you could do something, but what you'd have to do is you would lose a section, potentially by ramping up and maxing out all the seats in a class. But one section is only one class that a teacher would teach. And then you wouldn't be able to find any other sections to eliminate. Therefore, you brought the teacher down one section, all the other sections stayed the same, all the other disciplines. There was no curtailment ability. We looked at English, we looked at a number of the ones that we recommended, the classes were removed and we did curtail. We looked at Cisco, again, if you understand what I'm talking about, you have an entire math department. If you were to take the 9th grade math class and ramp up and put as many people in the seats as you can in the classroom, you may lose a section of 9th grade math. If you couldn't do it in 10th grade math, or even if you could, it's not the same teachers. So you really couldn't curtail a teacher. Number one. Number two, we didn't apply to PDE to be able to do that this year.
I guess 2 questions. One, have you guys administratively looked at this again this year? Because obviously the data I'm looking at is from 12 months ago.
Again this year.
Oh, you did?
Yes, we did. And very similar, it's almost cookie cutter again, same way. I mean, you couldn't curtail, you couldn't ramp up enough sections to be able to add up to a head count in any one of the courses.
Well, and we can also demote a teacher, correct? Without having to go to PDE? We can demote from full-time to 0.8 or 0.9 or 0.6 or 0.7?
Yes, theoretically you can do that. If you remember, the one issue we got into last year was with the not knowing how that all would pan out. We had a little bit of a challenge on that, and you have to make sure that the workload goes down as well. So the demotions that we were successful with were the ones where we went from full to half-time, where you actually then took the person's caseload and you cut it in half. We were able to do that with what Mr. Shaheen was just describing in some areas. But at this point, based on what he said in the analysis, and I know Anne Marie wants to chime in here, we wouldn't be recommending that this year. The other factor that I wanted to point in for some of the advanced classes is when you go, and if you just look at a spreadsheet with class sizes, you might see like AP calculus. And there might only be 10 kids in the school that actually meet the criteria to be in that class. So while it might look undersubscribed, if you were to not have that and lose that section by not having the people to cover it.
You also can't remove an AP course, because then you're at the other end of the special ed gifted program where you have to allow the AP courses to be offered and not remove them. So once they're in, you have to apply to remove them, correct? Once we offer a course and there's enough people to take it, you have to apply to remove that course.
We actually, through the background, eliminated a number of courses last year by reassigning a music teacher to the elementary that used to be offering electives at the high school, and also we did not replace the technical education teacher at used to be industrial arts tech ed now at the high school. So what that compounded to the back door was it ended up increasing all the other electives at the high school because we then eliminated 9 elective courses students could take. So although your numbers, when you look at them for review, reflected those 2 staff members there and elective numbers smaller, when we finally did the run, by eliminating those extra 2 electives, it forced more students into all the courses that are now offered at the high school.
Is the bottle...
We were able to do that because of retirements without filing PDE for any type of reassignment of teachers.
Is the constraint then the number of electives that we require as part of our strategic plan? Or is that not a bottleneck?
That's about 75% of it. The other is that when you have to assign the core subjects first, and you have so many different levels, applied in academic and honors and AP, you have to have enough sections for the students to fill after they get all of their core requirements that they want. So sometimes they don't fill to capacity, and that could be because you might have a number of students who want 3 or more courses, and there's only 1 section offered. And so that fills first the way we have the program designed.
I guess where I'm sort of going with this, and I don't know whether it applies to this year, but maybe steps that we need to take for next year or the year beyond, should we be doing something about changing our strategic plan so that constraint isn't put on us going forward? I understand if we have to offer an elective because that's a requirement of PDE, and because we've set ourselves up with these graduation requirements, you have to have X number of electives in conjunction with your core courses. But if we were to go to PDE and say, look, we want to revise our strategic plan and reduce the number of electives required in order to graduate, that would maybe give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of the amount of course offerings that we have. Because I'm looking at some of these numbers, and you're talking 5 students, 6 students in some of these classes. I'm thinking, where is the cutoff? Where do you guys sit down and say, well, look, if we had our druthers, we wouldn't offer this course at all?
You might be also looking at some of their special education without it being marked that way.
I'm looking at, I mean, look, I don't want to use this as a benchmark because it's stale data, but there were some classes in here, you know, that I just, music majors, 2 people out of 10, 5.
Those no longer are offered.
Okay, well.
But to answer your strategic plan question, in September of 2014, it will be time for you to actually rewrite your strategic plan. And so during that school year, you can look at the department regs as it will stand in that year, and you will be able to then redefine your graduation requirements.
Yeah, I mean, that's a year and a half from now. That doesn't solve our problem next year.
You do it every 3 years.
Yeah, I know. I guess I'm throwing that question out as it's not rhetorical. I'm throwing it out to the board, I guess, as well.
We could petition to change our strategic plan, but this, and again, correct. Students that were accepted under the strategic plan that was in place when they entered high school still have to complete those requirements. You can't take somebody who's a junior this year and say, hey, we changed it, therefore you can take 2 less requirements electives next year. They got to maintain that same strategic plan to graduation. Students coming in 9th grade would have the option, if we changed it, and they accepted it, and then they went into 9th grade next year with a new plan, they can march forward with that plan. That's the way it was explained to me. So
that's correct.
Everybody in place now has to, through 9th grade, so we have to maintain the current plan through the kids that are in 9th grade right now.
Gotcha.
Okay, and then when they come in, and if we changed it, those incoming freshmen would have a different benchmark that they needed to achieve to graduate.
Is that something we want to do?
How will it affect them in college?
Exactly.
I mean,
You're making a criteria easier to graduate. You're lowering your standards of graduation.
They're not going to be able to get in college because they're not going to have enough electives?
Correct.
I'm just asking the question. I mean, I look at the numbers, and you know, it looks to me like we're going to be throwing a couple $1 million worth of deficits in the next year, and the next year, and the next year. So, you know, and anytime we use fund balance or one of these one-time deals, like this year we have construction funds that we were able to use. Last year was stimulus money. You know, I'm not betting on another one-off next year or the year after that somebody somehow is going to come to our rescue with $750,000 or $1 million to help plug a hole in our budget. So I kind of look at it and say, well, look, we're going to be throwing deficits for the next couple of years. Sooner or later, you can't raise taxes enough to keep pace with that. So what are you going to do to solve the budget? Maybe not this year, but next year or the following year. So structurally, I'm trying to think ahead in what we're doing.
I understand the elective, but does the state require a minimum number of credits for graduation regardless of the strategic plan?
No, that's your definition. They tell you what courses they have to have exposure to. So that's why a lot of our courses are only half the semester.
So they don't say the student has to have 24 credits to graduate?
No. A lot of times you would ask your, as Mrs. Hamill suggested, your post-secondary institutions, what are they expecting the students to want to do in college? And most times you'll hear like, 3 or 4 maths, 3 sciences. So we've tried to model based on input from higher ed in order to have our students meet those needs.
And if I can just add, this is more of a philosophical, maybe political comment. If you follow what's going on in the news these days, there is an increasing pressure on our schools to continue to ramp up our standards and increase standards for students to compete in the global economy. So I know it creates, obviously, a tension there, but that's kind of what we're faced with, to try to provide our kids with the best program that they can have to be able to leave here and compete, whether it's in the college realm or whether it's in the technical world or in some other aspect of it. So at some point, you get to a point of diminishing returns with your academic program if you start to lose too much. That's just my opinion.
Well, look, I don't think you're going to find any argument with anybody up here. I'd love to see our kids learning Mandarin Chinese in kindergarten if we could teach that, you know, and offer as many courses as we can. I guess what I'm saying is we're stretched to the breaking point, and something's got to give. And the question is, what's going to give? Something's got to go. You only have so much money to go around. So what goes? And I'm trying to sit here and I'm thinking, looking at our last 2 years where we've sort of taken our budget and we've taken out just what we had to balance the budget. 2 years ago and then last year, you know, we're doing this in tranches, and I'm just wondering if we wouldn't be better served cutting into the budget in a way that's going to make a meaningful difference, not only this year, but in subsequent years going forward, so that we give ourselves an opportunity for our revenues to catch up to our expenses. Otherwise, you're just going to keep taking it in tranches, and we're going to keep throwing deficits year after year, and we continue to struggle with this. I'm open for suggestions. This isn't the Andrew Basil show.
I
So
thought that we were kind of, well, when I was looking at everything, our hands are pretty much tied with our contracts. And until those contracts become more available to negotiate, I thought we were waiting and trying to do the best we could until we are able to negotiate those contracts. And I don't see how we're not going to be pulling these programs out until we're able to actually negotiate.
well, when we have a deficit next year and we're going to close the gap, we're going to have to cut something. So I'm just throwing that. We haven't even closed the budget this year. So you can close the budget this year by saying we're going to use another $500,000 or $750,000 of fund balance. You're going to tax people. You can do this, that, the other thing. And okay, great. Now you've solved the problem this year. Next year you get the same problem all over again.
But I mean, again, we can go ahead and look at. I'm looking at the strategic plan right now. There's a graduation requirement for 09, 10, and 11, and there's a graduation requirement for those who graduate in 2012. If we were going to go ahead and change it, we would have a plan for those that would graduate, whatever the class next year would be. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure we can do too much yet. And you're betting on 4 years out on changing that plan.
It's easy to add back, I guess is where I'm going with it. You can always add program. That's easy.
I disagree. If we are truly fighting...
I don't agree with that at all. We add programming we've been adding programming for 15 years.
We took it out.
We added e-college 2 years ago, and it's gone again.
So how was it funded? Was it on a grant?
No, it was in the budget. Kids had signed up for it, and students had taken it, and we had to cut things. That was...
We added full-day kindergarten, now it's back down to half. You take it, it's
but that
not...
was the only reason kindergarten left, because we didn't have enough money.
And the only reason why it came in was because we had grant funding.
Debatable.
Grant.
That's debatable in hindsight. Last year, that's a debatable question.
I don't think it's debatable.
Sure it is.
The only difference between the two requirements for graduation is a third of an elective credit. I mean, so the elective...
What do you mean the difference?
The difference between the two strategic plans that are right now that we have is a third of an elective.
Yeah, there's not much difference between the two. I'm suggesting maybe we ought to take a look at that going forward. Last year we talked about what's the core requirements, and do we cut back to the core so that structurally we are better prepared to handle the fiscal constraints that we have going forward. Look, at the end of the day, salaries and benefits are gobbling up everything else in this budget, and it's crowding out everything else. And this year it's a bigger percentage of our overall budget than it was last year. Next year it's going to be even a larger percentage of the overall budget. Our debt is not going to change for the next foreseeable future, 10, 15 years. So what's going to give? It's going to be the discretionary stuff, the stuff that we can actually get our fingers on. That's sports, it's music, it's the things that make school fun. It's tax increases, which nobody likes. It's and it's chewing up your fund balance and taking that down to some level that probably wouldn't be healthy for the school district. So I'm open to suggestions and figuring out a way to.
Why don't we take it back to the curriculum committee? I'll ask Mrs. Kramer to give me a copy of the do a similar analysis that you have right there. And see if there's a low-hanging fruit that's being missed because it's in a 85-page report, and see if there's something there. If there's something there. I mean, if you get rid of an elective, you're still going to have to put that student somewhere.
No, I agree. I'm not advocating this. I'm just saying that, and I don't think there's any low-hanging fruit anymore.
I agree.
So,
but I'm thinking all I'm going to say is they got to be there for 9 periods a day, one of which is lunch. If you take them out of mechanical drawing, you got to put them somewhere. If you put them in study hall, you got to have somebody who monitors that study hall. So I'm not sure with the way our contracts are written and everything else that there's a lot of heads to be removed because you still got to put that child somewhere. Mm-hmm. And right now, there's complaints that some of these kids have 2 and 3 study halls in a day. And some of them are back to back. So, we can look at it, that's all I can say.
Okay. One of the other things we talked about was possibility of shutting down a building. You guys have produced some information in terms of intensity of use of space. Did you want to run through that for the benefit of the board?
Sure.
So we can put this question.
Sure. We had put the question out there. Anne Marie, do you want to? Anne Marie's been my assistant with this. You were provided with a document that was produced by Mrs. Trainer from the original work that I did along with the elementary principals. And I think once you hear Anne Marie's explanation, it doesn't look like it's feasible at this point. So let me have her walk through that, and then I can give you a suggestion on where you may want to look at going forward a number of years from now, or based on other circumstances that may come up. For the board members, if you don't, it looks like this. You'll have it.
I was asked to take each building, total number of rooms, and what the rooms are currently being used for, and the percentage of the day or the week that they're being used. And so, what you see for the 4 elementary centers is the total number they have, the total number unused, what they're being used for, and the percentage of the day they're being used for that capacity. Where you see, for example, the 80% in your on-board classes, that's because there is no staff at Amity Primary Center, and so all of those teachers in the other 3 elementaries go over there for a day or more than a day to service the Amity Primary students. And that's why you have one day each week their classroom might be open. Where you see 50% like gifted, that's because we have a person wearing 2 hats now. We do not have a gifted teacher in each elementary center. We don't have a gifted teacher. And we have no gifted teacher at ABC that's shared with AIC. So that's the current state that I sent you on that spreadsheet. Then Dr. Otto asked me to take a look at the buildings, eliminate intervention classrooms, eliminate any large group instruction classrooms which are built the size of 2 classrooms. A large group instruction room, for the most part, is defined as 2 regular sized classrooms. So if I eliminated what I needed for Birdsboro for LGI rooms, intervention rooms, for OT, PT hours, said they have to find themselves a space somewhere. I would need 25 classrooms to house Birdsboro. And when I look at all the empty spaces doing the same thing at ABC, AIC, and NEC, no OT, no PT, no intervention rooms, no LGI rooms, I only came up with 17 empty spaces. So I'm 8 short plus special ed offices, which we have a somewhere in an administrative building to put into. So there's no space allocation left, for example, with school psychologist testing, which we now have for the small rooms for, and we have to use them for some of your gifted classrooms and so on. The other thing that, if you were considering Birdsboro, just for your information, Birdsboro is a building that qualifies us for Title I money, for Title II money, which comes out to be about $280,000, $290,000, depending on the year, and that is directly tied to their free reduced lunch percentage. And so if you spread those children out over the other 3 buildings, that would diminish the percentage in one building and therefore eliminate that funding. The 85 students who currently are part of the food bank's backpack program that we feed on the weekends, again, related to buildings that have high percentages of free reduced lunch. That would be a service we wouldn't offer anymore. Just for your information in addition to it. So, Birdsboro being what it is and where special education classrooms that we need and the regular classrooms that we need. That would be what would be left to find a home for. And that would leave no room for growth in the future. That would be capacity, even economics.
Tough question. What about 5 years from now?
I suggested that to Dr. Otto. I happened to just have the opportunity on Sunday to be around Union Township and feeling that at some point when the economy makes a turn and you start to see additional homes, you'd be looking at trying to find space.
Okay. So you're not holding this to you personally or the administrator. Next 5 years, you don't see that happening, closing Birdsboro?
I can't tell you.
I know, but you don't see the population of students decreasing that tremendously that you could possibly do it within the next
I
year.
don't think we lost the bubble. The bubble is right now in the middle school at 325, 330, and we're looking at, I don't know when some of the students come back from kindergarten.
We discussed that as we went through this, and one of
I think it leveled off for a little while.
But, yeah, I mean,
One of the things
you don't see it, like, diving down even more, and, you know.
I don't see that.
Okay.
I would
That's
suggest
my
that you would have to look at it in terms of sections. I mean, you can manipulate class size numbers a little bit, so let's just take a round number of 25. Looks like we need to lose, Anne Marie, what, about 10 to 12 more spaces before we could reasonably even do this. So if you take that,
You're
just
going to still have OCPs.
right, but that's, I mean, this would be stretching it to capacity, but so you're talking about at least a dip of 250 kids at the K to 5 level.
Okay.
Okay, so we didn't do this just by space and use of space. We went through and said, okay, based on the classrooms, the number of kids in the classrooms, and taking that to max, and then so now we fill all the classrooms fully, and then looking at the number of classes that would be lessened and the room usage that would go down. Have we gone to that detail, or are we doing a one-for-one classroom that's presently in use for a classroom swap?
No, they maxed out the classroom.
I maxed out the regular education classrooms that I will need, but then I also, for example, at Birdsboro, need at least 4 special education rooms, which I can't predict how many of the population of the grade level will end up going in or out of that. But I do know that if you were going to move them tomorrow, not only would I need X number of regular education classrooms, I need 4 special education classrooms, I need, so there's additional things that you can't just divide 25 into a grade level population because there's other required classes that come out of that population. Like emotional support classroom, like life skills, autistic,
And in terms of special ed, before you ask your question, special ed numbers are capped by Pennsylvania law at a certain much lower maximum amount than what a regular ed classroom. You would be, quote, out of compliance if you were to say that the cap is 12, like for a life skills class. You can't put a 13th child in that room. It's illegal.
and you can't put them in less than a full-size class.
When you say full-size classroom, I guess one of the things that sort of popped in my head was if you've got these large you've got classroom, and I guess what I was just trying to figure out was when someone's pulling a kid out of class for OT or PT work or speech therapy or whatever it could be, and they're going into this other room to work with them, right? Are there 5 other kids in the room at the same time, or they're just using that entire room for the treatment of one child, one at a time, sequentially?
When I've seen them, there's been 4 or 5 students together.
Okay. And then I guess the next question I had would be, not that this happens this year, but if numbers continue to drop, because right now we're in enrollment levels equivalent to, somewhere around 2005 in the K through 5 group. Okay, so I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, okay, at what point? And I think Dr. Otto sort of alluded to this. Does the population get to where we need to actually take a deep dive into this and really look at shutting down a building? Is it 1,500 students? Is it 1,400 students? Where do we? Is it a feasible alternative for us to close down a building? Because otherwise, we're just wasting a lot of people's time by.
Dr. Otto looked at that. I'll send it back to him. He was looking at those numbers today.
Yeah, I would say that if we get to some point where we lose about 10 more sections, then we can begin to have the conversation. But I really think the other variables that come into play are what will happen in terms of our special ed population, which you can't predict year to year. It's somewhat stable, but you may have to add a learning support classroom. You may have to add another emotional support classroom based on the needs that the children bring. And you can't say no. You have to find a room for them. So that bumps another room, one of these spaces, back to the use that you weren't necessarily predicting.
Can you demise, Anne-Marie, you mentioned the state requires certain things for special ed. Can you demise a room? Can you take a room and go and get some cubbies and split it into four sections? So you have four private rooms.
You could do that with a speech therapist. We currently have what I did with this plan was putting them in less than full-size rooms. We have a couple of smaller rooms. And so that's what I did do with this plan. So anybody who isn't required to have a square footage to have a program running, I did put them in small rooms. So let's say I used all those and we still had more of those types of situations, yes. We could put a wall up, we could put different things up.
But I do want to caution from purely a special ed standpoint, because one of my roles in a previous employment was I'm a trained special education monitor, and I would go into districts to see if their programs were compliant. There was actually a square footage requirement per student per room that you have to go in there and measure. And if you don't have the proper square footage for the number of kids that are in the room, you'll be found out of compliance and made to fix it. So there are some pretty stringent regulations.
When we went to, and I remember this coming up, Mr. Finley brought it up, that when we did MEC and when we looked at AIC, we looked at the middle school, we were trying to figure out if we could put more, because there are less special education students in a classroom than there are regular other students. And they were talking, and they said, what would happen if, so just for a number, just say 10, I mean, we're allowed to put 10 in a normal size classroom, an 11th kid, we would have to open up an entire classroom for that 11th student, because you couldn't overtax the classroom, because they were looking to try to do that. And it's unfortunate, but that's I think where a lot of this was coming from.
Well, I just think it's something that we need to look into in terms of whatever these constraints are, whether it's a number of square feet per room, or it's a number of special needs kids in a particular collective, whether it's a group class or it's I think we need to know what those constraints are, lay them out, and then do an analysis in terms of our capital structure and say, okay, well, look, if you put all those constraints in place, at what point does the student population demand that you can actually shut down a building? And then it becomes pretty cut and dry. As opposed, and I agree, there's always going to be a little bit of gray area here, but our percentage of special needs or special education children has remained constant over the last 15 years as a percentage of the student body, around 13%.
That's a national and a state average, so that's pretty.
So I think you can kind of bank on that. You're going to get a couple outliers here and there, but I think going forward, if trends continue the way they have been, you could see our population drop off. The population has dropped off over almost 200 kids in the last 2 years. So I don't think it's inconceivable to be looking at this again in 2014.
I think another thing we'll be able to tell by February, March of 2013 is to look at the trend of next year's first grade registrations. If individuals are putting their children somewhere else at half-day kindergarten or full-day kindergarten and staying there, then we're going to start to see a statistic that we can start to look at enrollments that are starting to the school district also that you could predict for the future.
Have we even looked at the back of a napkin saying, okay, this is what the savings would be? But you got to add the extra transportation, which we're not going to get reimbursed for anymore. This is the first time I heard that we lose that grant. That's $280,000. Add all these things up. Take it apart, replacing chillers. Okay, take it apart and potentially have to do a roof. If we add all those things up and say, okay, yeah, we're going to close the building today, apart from having to do the capital thing, what would the savings be? I mean, is it significant now, or if we start adding 280 in and some of these other things, is it something that doesn't make a lot of sense?
Well, I wasn't suggesting BEC is the building that you target.
Well, again,
you let the
one that's been going around.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying. I think you let the information dictate which building if there is a building to close, I think you let the information dictate what building that is. And maybe it's AIC. I don't know.
Well, and as we, just to go back to the genesis of where this whole conversation started, I guess I'll take some blame here. I actually brought it up when we were brainstorming what were potential areas for cuts. I mean, the board made it very clear, put everything on the table. So we went out and went into the entire universe of everything on the table. So that is obviously, it's an option. I think we gave it our due diligence to take a look at it, a hard look at it. And I'm pretty confident in saying I don't think it works right now. I just don't think it works. I mean, I honestly thought it might when I took a first look at it. Mr. Smith and I went out and toured all the buildings. We looked around. And then I included Anne Marie and the principals in the conversation to get a little bit more of a micro look at it. And I'm just going to be honest. I could not support it. I don't think it works at this point.
Can we, again, the reason we keep mentioning Birdsboro is
it's the oldest building.
It's the oldest building. But
that's why we.
Can we close a building that we still have outstanding, we owe on still, and just leave it? You want to talk about taxpayers being upset. Here's a building that we're still paying on that we're not going to close and not use at all.
And we're also talking about putting chillers in there.
Yeah.
Well, so actually, I'm talking about adding.
That was just
I agree with you.
Popping up. If it makes sense, then we move forward.
What's been lost in this conversation?
Go ahead,
let me make this point. Excuse me. What's been lost in this conversation thus far, and I mean, I'm not prepared to really. I don't have a plan on a piece of paper tonight, but we want to get out of the lease not get out of the lease, but when the lease runs out at Matthew Brook, we would not like to continue to spend $100,000 on a rental when I believe that there may be some space reclaimable, perhaps at our high school. I'd have to look at that a little more closely, where we could actually put our central office function, which is done in a lot of school districts our size, where we actually use building space. So that could reap significant savings, and that could happen with a lot less fanfare than I think the rest of this that we're talking about.
But I think
conversations. I've yet to hear a number.
Or we haven't calculated one.
Mr. Sheen, I think this is one of those buildings and grounds facility committee every year look at this, whether it be Birdsboro, APC, or whatever. But I think we just spent 20 minutes and we all kind of agree, Mrs. Trainer, that it's not going to happen next year, and so let's take that off this budget and let's move on to the next topic. And no disrespect to anybody, but I think that's a committee decision to go through it all.
We've been on this for weeks. We knew
going
into it, we couldn't do it.
So then let's.
I think we owe it as part of the budget discussions to have this conversation in public for the benefit of the public, because they're asking the same question.
We did.
We did
do that. We realized we could.
Okay, not everybody.
I heard 11 classrooms that we were short. Now it's 8. It's still 8. We can't do it. So obviously, we'll look into it, like everything. We're not going to throw it behind the curtain, but let's take a look at it. Obviously, what's our plan later on if you do close it, like Mr. Sheen said? What's the revenue going to be? The 280 is a big factor right now. If we're already in the hole, so now where are we going to make that up?
Because every school district is doing
It depends on the building. You can't do that calculation until you've determined which building to
We're going to
close.
lease it out.
So
now it's got to be up and running building. So we're going to have to do the chillers. So obviously we're going to rent
you're still
that
talking about BEC, Scott.
Well, that's what
I'm saying any building.
These two are the newest buildings.
Well, we
over
just
here.
spent
So we're gonna close
ABC.
them.
We just spent $9
million
on
and then have
ABC
this-
to fix it.
But you're going to let the numbers tell you which is the best building. So you're going to take into consideration the Title I
best
grant money.
building's gonna be
You're going to take into consideration transportation costs. You're going to take into consideration all those factors
definitely
when you
don't
make
think
your
it's
ultimate decision as to which
definitely
building to
can't
close.
solve that in a month and a
or
half.
APC, you're going to see the volume of kids there. Walk the halls and tell me you're going to shuffle them someplace else.
You just heard the administration say you're going to have to lose another 200 students before you even have the
Right,
conversation.
But we're still
So
talking about closing a building.
not this year. We're not.
Okay, well, let's just put this on the burner and we'll come in for review.
The timing on this is, if we backed up the timing, it's like 18 months. Is that
Right.
You got to, which is why you need to have the conversation at any time of year, not just, hey, look, in April we're going to talk about it. That's. I mean,
If I can
I don't understand why everybody's getting so upset about this.
Well,
no
we
one's
have 15
suggesting we
minutes for
close a
budget
building
meeting,
this
We're
year.
not doing anything for this year. We're worrying about, obviously, we have to go into years out, but we still haven't done anything for.
Okay, part of the budget process, I think, is talking about what you can do not only to solve the problem this year, but solve the problem next year and the year after. And that's all I'm saying.
There's a big possibility going into it tonight. We all knew it. So that's all.
I think the people out there and reading the newspapers deserve to hear the answer as well.
I think what they want to hear is no tax increase. I think what they want to hear. But obviously there's also
We could talk about that.
an issue with programs that nobody wants to cut. But since we can't, we have to cut programs because there's monetary agreements that we have to meet with other people. I think everyone could step up to the plate, and I'll leave it at that.
Take the floor. I mean, seriously, I don't want this to be, take the floor and talk about the issue that you're...
It's a hard issue that cut program, and really, quite frankly, $1.2 million, even if we're $700,000, $800,000, where are we going to go? Where are you really going to go to affect the quality of this district? We keep cutting. Who's going to want to move into Daniel Boone School District? I wouldn't send my kids. If that's going to happen, they can go to Exeter, Owen J. Roberts, Ole, Twin Valley. They're struggling, but they're making it. Where's it all going to end up? And like you say, what's going to happen when they graduate? When they go to college? What's going to be on their transcript? So it is very hard. And I like the people out there sitting there to know that. I mean, it's going to be very down to the wire.
Well, if I can just cut back in on the Birdsboro, I will repeat myself. We're not prepared administratively to recommend at this time that we can close that building. I want that in the press, in the paper. That we'll stand by that. I think I don't know how many more times we can research this. If anyone still has any doubts, I will take you on a personal tour of each of the buildings when the kids are in the building, and you can see what we're doing there on a daily basis.
I agree. I want to move along. It's been now 45 minutes. We haven't added or taken it off of this list we got here. And I just want to move it. We added another 10,000.
Well, do you have options?
I do.
We don't have options. That's the issue.
I mean, I'm sitting here, I threw out two options. One was, can we put to bed this issue of a building closing? And the other one was high school class sizes. So I'm open to suggestions and ideas from other members of the board.
We had it brought up last meeting about charging everybody a flat fee for participation in or an activity fee, and obviously we got interpretation from our solicitor that we can or should not do that. So that's off the table. We got an impassioned email today, and I'm sure if we have time for a public comment that we're going to hear about cutting middle school language program, supporting and keeping that to cut middle school sports, and that's not, I mean, again, then we're back to who's going to move into the district if we don't have a sports program.
Mr. Sheen, Dr. Otto, one thing maybe we can get out is a special ed reduction. If Dr. Otto feels...
Yes, we're prepared. Absolutely.
I mean, if you're comfortable...
No, I'm just waiting for the cue. We have represented a number on the options recommended side of your spreadsheet of $200,000. I was asked very specifically to make sure that number was something we could live with, and we had another meeting again today just to verify it. And again, while I'm not 100% comfortable on paper, if you look at what we will have come September 1 for placements, it is almost, Danielle, you can verify this for me, just about $200,000 less than what was actually loaded in the budget in the beginning of the budget process. So we're ready to take that out.
So in the meantime, can we take 150 at least out?
I would take the 200.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just asking, can we take 200 out then?
I would also like to bring in another source, and this was, as I had said to you in my board update, we were continuing, although I hate this phrase, we were sharpening our pencil some more. We found some additional expenditures that we believe we can expense toward access funding to about the level.
Can you explain access funding for the other board members?
Sure. Access is like a grant. Students who have Medicaid cards are allowed to, we are allowed to bill Medicaid for services that we perform on them. This has been a long-running program. Daniel Boone has been involved in Access long before I got here. I was involved in it in a previous life in another school district. We have earmarked a plan, and I'll be happy to forward this out to the other board members, where we think we can access about $500,000 to $600,000 worth of revenue a year, maybe a little more, using these access funds that we get in. As you spend them, they are replenished to us on a monthly basis. It's kind of a reimbursement factor for the more needy children and services that are billable for those children, and it comes back to the district. There has actually been talk politically over the last decade of taking away that benefit from school districts. So my recommendation, while we still have it, is to make sure we keep using it in the budget, because that is definite tax. If you were to lose that money, you still won't lose the responsibility to perform the services that we're using that money to cover.
So you're telling us to put another $500,000?
Oh, no. You can't just.
You can't budget.
You have to have access as revenue in, expenditure out. There has to be a balance.
Okay.
So what we're saying is when you have one-time costs that are new, you can, instead of taking them out of local tax dollars, you can take them, and Access is a federal program, a federal and state program. You can take the money out of the Access and expense it toward that. You still can't exceed your budget, but Mrs. Penza has to put it in on the revenue side and also has to put it in on the expenditure side, so at the end of the year they match.
We can take
You can move something.
Intended for that expense and use it elsewhere.
Because, as I just said, the money needs to be spent.
Understand that, but I mean, again, trying to get to a number here.
50,000.
Okay, so we can put another $50,000 back.
That's what we're comfortable with. We would like to add $50,000 to the revenue side.
This recommendation of the reduction of special education placement budget of $200,000, is that on the left side or is that still over there?
It's on the right.
I'm recommending you move it.
So we're recommending $250,000.
That is correct.
Being put back there. Ballpark. I know you don't like the ballpark.
Well, one's in and one's out.
Right,
One's increase and one's decrease.
But we get
overall net $250,000.
The net is your gap just shrunk $250,000, $250,000.
So you're about 981.
Yeah, no, 90. The other one, again, I'm going to
980.
last year, so I'm going to pop them in here. We had money being held in escrow for the stadium project. How much?
Well, you have about 135 in reserve and about 177 in project.
Okay.
300.
300,000. That money has to be used for capital, correct? Or put into the capital. Where does that
They
money
have to go back into, the one has to go back into the reserve and one has to go back into the project.
Do we have money currently in the budget for projects that we're going to come out of the general fund for that money?
I don't think we have anything budgeted.
Not at this time.
No.
Not at this time.
Does Kenny have anything in his budget that would come out of capital reserve for the project fund?
Well, as you know,
I
we've
would
been.
say not at this time. He doesn't. This is his
So
general operating.
getting $300,000 back on the escrow fund doesn't help us on the budget.
It just
Not on
helps us
general
with our
fund
reserve
Our reserve
I have a
doesn't
question.
help us on our
operating
I have a
budget.
question though. The $170,000 that's going into the project fund, can we then turn around and spend reduce debt again next year?
You would be able to
Only if
defease
we-
the bond, but you would have to make up the difference. So if the principal to defease the bond's $800,000 and you're going to use 177, you come up with the remainder out of your
Okay.
general
Yeah, we
fund.
talked about that
So you can't use
before.
part. Okay, you understand my...
You could, if you can justify the useful life and whatnot, use that 177
Okay, so basically,
for
no. I mean-
some kind of project.
Why couldn't we use that for the children?
You could.
You could.
You can.
We've already done the lifespan. We've done the study on the chillers, and the usable lifespan would qualify.
You have $130,000 out of the 900 and change that has to be used for something right now. But my understanding is we've already earmarked the chiller for that.
That's what I thought.
We haven't made that official.
I
We'd
think
like to
what
do
we're
that
talking about
officially at some
now
point.
is the $300,000 is sitting in escrow with Union Township for the stadium project, which is a different pool of money.
When will that be released?
Probably a couple of months, I would think.
Well, it's in...
That's in litigation.
It's in litigation at the moment.
No comment.
I can't really
It's litigation. I don't want to comment.
comment.
No, I'm not laughing. I'm just thinking it's a simple thing, right?
Typically, the way these things work is the engineers from the municipality have to come out and sign off on everything as being complete, and then they
There's a
hang on to the
process.
rescue. They hang on to the escrow balance for a period of time after the completion date. So the question is, when was it fully completed and signed off on and agreed to by both parties that that's the completion date, and then that usually starts the clock running for when the escrow money should be released.
Funds right now are frozen and not allocated for anything.
Right, no, I mean,
They have to be buried in escrow
Just
account.
keeping those funds because it's in escrow. They can't touch them.
Yeah, they're not spending the money. It's
No,
ours, so it's just a function of when do we get it.
A little bit of interest. Put it in.
Gaining minimal interest.
Yeah.
Okay. So that doesn't give us any relief.
Well, I mean, it gives me a little bit of comfort in the sense that we've bled our reserves, our capital reserves down to almost nothing.
Budget, but as far as
Yeah, and so it's nice to know that we don't have to think about, at least this year, trying to fund from our operating budget capital reserves. which is a discussion we've had in the past.
We can take the whole Chillard conversation to the next facilities committee and come back with a recommendation on a funding plan for how that.
Well, that's fine. My concern was, and the issue was, I wanted to know if any of this money could be held to further reduce our deficit. The answer is no.
That's correct.
No pot of gold there. Move on to the next one.
I have a question. I'm sorry. You said projected fund balance of 3.7. Is that 710? Is that 3.7 with the 710 or without the 710?
It would be $3 million with the 710 out of it.
Okay. So if we do use it next
That number is what I...
You would have June 30th.
What I think. Well, now, again...
Okay, I'm not telling you yes.
That's what
okay.
I'm saying right now. We may have it June 30th. That number could go way up or way down.
Okay,
again.
but you're saying at June 30th we'd have 3.7.
Right. So if you would take the 710 out
Then
of
we'd
it,
end up
you'd be
with
down
3.
to
Okay.
3.
Okay.
You'd be down, 2.939295 is where it is right now.
If everything...
Again, I'm not holding you that. I'm just asking.
But our deficit right now is 900 what?
980. 776.
Well, for the sake of tonight, can we take a couple things and say yay or nay once and for all so the administration can move forward? Middle school foreign
We would
language?
appreciate that.
Middle school foreign language? Yes or no? I personally would say no. I think, again, you take away a program, I don't think you're ever going to get it back.
Well, just if I can chime in on that one, as you know, any of the curtailments that are on the record now have to be decided upon by the board as to whether or not you're going to access them. So if you decide
we don't have to apply again for it next year. It's there for...
No, you have to
You
annually.
have to play it every year.
Annually.
And you have to vote no on it, right? If you turn
You have to go through the same three-step process. You vote to apply, you vote to accept. If you get rejected, then it's a moot point. If you get approved, then you have to vote to accept the approval, which is what you notice on tonight's committee of the whole agenda.
Let me ask you, if you accept the approval, you still don't have to execute.
That is correct.
You're just keeping the option on the table.
That is correct. Once you vote not to do it, you're done for this year. You will not be able to access that curtailment.
Well, again, that vote isn't, if I understand again from Mr. Subers, if we vote no right now on foreign language, it doesn't mean in 30 days we can't bring it back up and vote yes to do it. Until the budget's passed, we can pass it back.
Are you talking about the budget? Or are you talking about the actual PDE process that we're following?
The budget. PDE process, we have to accept it or reject it. But for the budget process, we can say no to foreign language right now. And in 30 days, bring it back up and say, well, we still can't close the gap, so we got to put it in.
Yeah, I think you can do whatever you want, so long as you're not closing the door on the other at a voting meeting and saying we're not accepting or we are accepting.
Accept the PDE thing and then move from there.
Well, I think we also heard if we would have to accept this, which I'd rather not, what's the downside with middle school foreign language? I know middle school foreign language, what's the downside, or if you would have that program?
Mrs. Trainer, while you're answering those, maybe you want to walk through the personnel piece that's involved in this too.
If you voted to eliminate foreign language at the middle school, which is now, it's not a core subject, it's what they call an overview, cultural exploration of the three languages, then I would work with staff to replace that with an academic reading program for all the students who are currently proficient or advanced as per Travel Beyond. So there would be another core put in there as a placeholder for Mr. Henkel using the grade program that we had talked about before. So the teachers would then go into the mix of all the individuals that I need to look at as far as reassigning or furloughing or demoting. But as far as would it shortchange a student? Philosophically, some people believe as early as elementary school, it's nice to have a foreign language component. We don't and never have. And so if you talk to some people, they believe they can get as much culture at the high school level, other people believe it's nice at the middle school. So it's either way, I'll have a core subject for them. That decision will impact who's where and who gets further.
I mean, just a delay for foreign language picking up in ninth grade.
They'll learn the culture when they go into level 1 of the
But this isn't actually, I'm sorry, go ahead, Scott. Mike.
Right now, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, that they get a little bit of the three languages, French, German, and Spanish, okay? And they learn just some basic things, and they kind of go through it pretty quickly over the course of the school year.
Correct.
It's kind of a survey introductory course.
Okay. Well, I guess my question would be then, how will these kids, going into high school, 9th grade, then decide, what language they want to pursue, and they won't really have that introductory? I mean, what can we put in
I
there?
don't believe that impacts their decision. When you look at the overwhelming number that choose Spanish and they have all three, according to Mr. McEnroe, he hasn't had to reassign students because there's been closed sections of German or French. I asked that question of the high school guidance. They didn't believe the course actually impacted their decision as much as the student knows where they're going once they leave high school and know what they need in order to be able to communicate in that career.
Yeah, but I think if you're exposed to it in 8th grade, you would definitely know there's no change in 9th grade because they've been exposed to it in 8th grade.
But they're getting all three languages, so not like they're just being exposed to Spanish and then take Spanish at night. You're getting Spanish or you're getting French.
I agree with that, but at least there's someone exposed to one of them.
I got more about them. You're eliminating the middle school foreign languages, $34,000.
24.
125.
It looked like it threw without the glasses. Leaving it there, is there it's not a $124,000 goes the other way. Was there an additional, had to be hired at the high school because of that?
No, we were going to be able to furlough a person.
Okay.
Because we don't need them, we will then need them at the high school in Spanish because, and I can't tell you at this point if you said to me, no, keep it, then I have to go back and look at other staffing to be able to say to you, okay, because right now I have a placeholder of one of those current teachers going into the elementary. So now I would go back and look and come back to you and say, I actually can give you one more elementary position just by sheer lack of, sections. But I don't know that until I know what I have to do with individuals in the department.
So keeping the middle school language programs doesn't necessarily increase our budget. There's not an impact on $124,000, it would be something less because of that.
Correct. You wouldn't save as much.
So again, that's what I'm trying to look at. We eliminate it, we save $124. If we keep it, it's only going to cost us $60 or whatever.
Correct. It could. I can tell you that.
It's 100.
It really only costs us $60,000.
But that's a $180,000 swing in your budget.
Correct.
So,
I mean, I'm taking from what I've heard from the administration, it sounds to me as if it's something that we can let go. It's not preferable, but it's something that we can let go. It's not impacting kids' ability to learn a foreign language at the high school level or select a foreign language at the high school level. I didn't start speaking a foreign language until I got into high school. It just seems to me that's something that's, of all the choices we have, that's the least, it's not the worst decision to make. There's no good decisions in front of us, but I'm saying if I had to make a choice, that would be the easier one to make than the others.
I don't think, again, using Mr. Scott's, Mr. Potts's scenario, I don't think somebody would not choose moving into the school district because we didn't have a foreign language program in middle school. Remove the bands, remove the sports, and they see that. But again, I got a kid that thrives in middle school. She's taking French and Spanish both at the same time. I would think that we're stuck with this scenario where we're not going to get help contractually, so we need to do something here. I don't want to raise taxes either. Even if we raise taxes, we're still got a deficit. So, and the good thing that comes out of it is that we're going to improve and strengthen our reading program. If there is
Right. It's not like they're going to study.
good thing versus going just to study one setting.
No, I would just, if I can add in here, this whole foreign language thing is near and dear to my heart. I spent my first 12 years of my career, I'm certified as a Spanish and French teacher. I did this and saw the value of it. I would liken this conversation that I'm about, the comments I'm about to make, to the kindergarten discussion that we had 2 years ago. A lot of these decisions are monetary. And anyone here would say philosophically that they're opposed to those things. But the nice thing, if you can say there was a silver lining, we were still able to keep part of kindergarten. It was still there. So I would use the same analogy now. Even though we're losing the middle school part of it, we're still being able to offer 4 years of 3 foreign languages to our students at the high school level. That's still a good thing. But the stark reality is we've got some money problems that we have to deal with as well. So I feel like if I can endorse this as a former foreign language teacher, I would think that most people can. I don't like it. It's like it's a little bit tough to take, but I'm just looking at the bright side, saying I'm glad we can still offer students 4 years of 3 foreign languages, and that should be plenty to get any student into the college of their choice.
Again, just so that we're not eliminating foreign language, we're eliminating an introduction, a brief introduction, that what I'm hearing from is you're learning your colors, you're learning your numbers, and a few other things, and it's not...
Everything that will be reinforced again in level 1.
So it helps move it along, but it's not like they're coming out with Spanish 1 like they used to do a number of years ago, going into high school taking Spanish 2.
Anybody else have an opinion on it? Do we want to do a straw vote or show of hands on?
I think we need to we need to go along with this.
I think we should show it over at this point, but I'm not, where Mr. McCullough said once and done, I think we should move it over. But
You don't have to vote on it yet.
yeah,
We're not voting on the budget. I mean, I think what we're trying to do is...
You have time.
And I think what happened last year, and Mr. Sheehan and Mr. McCullough and Mr. Potts can speak to this as well, you can move a lot of things over, and then depending on what we do with taxes and fund balance, you can move some things back. And I think that's going to be the rub at the end of the day, and that's going to be the questions that we're going to be asking ourselves.
Here's what they need. We need to post something by May 4th. We need to vote on something. And again, up until the vote in June, we can change anything. But we have to balance it by May 4th?
You don't need to post anything by May 4th. I need the information from you guys by May 4th in order to get you for your committee of the whole in May, the proposed. The posting of it doesn't actually get posted until
the end of May.
after you vote it.
But so again, we can...
May 21st.
You move it to the left, you can move it back to the right.
How does that affect Mrs. Trainer?
That's the problem.
She's going to explain that now.
Yeah, I just want to walk you through a timeline for any furloughing of employees. I'm working with Danielle and I'm giving her names, and it can go this way or that way. At the May 21st board meeting, you need to, specific by name, officially vote to furlough individual teachers. So it's a motion and you name, elementary teacher, Mrs. X, and so on. They then get an official letter which tells them they have 10 days in order to ask for you to have a hearing where they can try to appeal their status, and then at the June meeting you would formally vote for you might say, well,
We changed our mind.
We've changed our mind. But we need to formally put their name on and have that time frame for them to have their due process of coming to you after the May 21st board meeting. So Danielle's saying she needs to know who they are by May 4th in order to do their numbers. But we do have to act in May. We can't wait to June because they have rights as far as the appeal process that we have to follow, just as we did 2 years ago.
So those positions, what you're saying is foreign language and elementary band program, the two options that we have on the table that would deal with furloughing of employees are ones that
You have the class size reduction too.
and the class size reduction. Right. Those are 3 things that you need affirmative action on by this board early part of May.
And then you can choose, as you're talking to Danielle, take something out and put something back. But you can take somebody's name off the May board meeting and say you're not going to furlough the May, let's say, choose an example. Something else would have to go into that budget, but we do have to have them on the May meeting.
Can I bring up another topic?
Yeah, we got 3 minutes.
Okay, well, that's still Mr. Shaheen's thunder, but he brought it to my attention. The BCTC budget. They're getting, come on, Mr. Sheen, if you want, you're the one who brought it to my attention.
We're going to discuss this.
It's on the agenda.
It's on the agenda, but I figured since we're doing budget.
We got a budget we got to vote on, and if you follow what Boyertown did and then went back in and dug into it, the budget didn't get reduced even though they furloughed 7 head count, and their staff did not take a pay freeze either. I mean, I'm not going to vote to do this. If we don't approve this budget, what happens?
I think that's what I asked a month ago.
Yeah.
That, and the other thing is, why didn't their budget go down? If they
Yeah, why
furloughed
did pretty
some...
much share on this go down? They're furloughing 7 heads, and their budget didn't go down.
And what is
Mr.
their-
Wolf, did you get
Yeah,
word?
there's a reason for that I was told, is that they get the average, their raises are based on the average of the school districts that participate. That's what determines their increase or whatever their
I'd like to see that in
salary.
writing. I really would.
But if you
even
do
it
7
does, okay,
positions,
say even the raises in there, they still furloughed 7 heads. Okay.
the budget got to go down.
Season heads. So let's use a number of in ballpark of $90,000. $600 and something thousand of that budget should have been removed, and it did.
And even if you divide it by 10 or 12 schools, you're talking $60,000 a school.
$50,000 less.
Correct. And I agree with that. So there's some reason the budget should go down something.
If we vote no on this and don't approve it, what happens?
What I read in the paper, and this I've never encountered this before, obviously this is a new circumstance, is that it's based on the percentage of the school districts around the county that vote yea or nay for it that will determine its fate. So your vote of a no, say the other 10 vote yes, would kind of be just a symbolic thing.
But
one that had voted no.
But I think Mr. Dean's saying that before we vote on it next week, can we get an answer as to why their budget didn't decrease?
I think Dr. Lee could.
Because I really would hate to be.
Yeah, but I don't want to wait till that night.
Facility next week, and this board votes no on it.
Yeah, I don't want to wait, especially when we're there.
That just happens to be.
Well, I agree with it, but what I'm trying to say, I'd like to know the answer before we walk into the building, and if we vote. Correct.
I'm sure we have an answer for that in 24 hours.
Yeah, let's call Dr. Lees tomorrow and get an explanation.
Correct.
Okay.
We want to vote no anyways.
And we got about 8
sure
seconds
he's
till
already
we get
been
to
asked.
7:15. So, anybody else have any other questions on budget? All right, so I'm assuming that we've moved over for the time being. Middle school foreign language is a yes for the time being.
If you take a straw vote, I'd say no, but...
Straw vote? Everybody raise their hands in favor of moving it over? Okay.
And Mr. Fox, you're still looking at transportation?
Yes. I want to get with people later in the committee for a meeting.
That was on my list of questions as well, so thanks for following up with that. Okay, we're going to adjourn this meeting, and then we got to switch right over to an ERC meeting.
Right.
So for those people who have questions, if you want to save them for public comment when we get to the end of the committee of the whole, we'll be happy to entertain your questions then.
You want to adjourn this so I can note it?
Yep, meeting adjourned.
We're back on live. Back live.
You guys have to go stretch.
Yeah, Dr. Basically, we're trying to figure out the question of redistricting between Birdsboro and Amity and Douglas. So I think we came up with 2 scenarios. We're here to figure out which one we want to present to the rest of the board tonight. I guess we're trying to make parity that everything kind of flows the way it is, and I think, whatever scenario I think it works best.
Well, I'd like to recommend one. We have a lot of different options. We decided not to go with 9 at large for a lot of different reasons, did we not?
Yes.
Okay. The one I like is the one that Mr. Kurtz recommended. Birdsboro 1 and 2 and Amity 1. Amity 3, 4, and 6. Union 1 and 2, Amity 2, and Amity 5. That gives 31%, 34%, and 35% respectively population. And it also disrupts the least amount as far as movements of bodies when people that are currently on the board, as well as those who potentially move off the board moving forward.
Now again, we can do this we can file this, if accepted, it would be effective the next election, but it could be changed in 2020 when the new census comes out. Again,
then we'd have to,
but again, that's...
Actually, I think we haven't we have well, you don't have to do anything, but we probably want to have an obligation to proactively do it going forward.
That's what I'm saying, like every census, do it. But, so do we have somewhat of consensus to do that recommendation?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that recommendation.
Okay.
It seems like it's the only
Then I
alternative.
guess we're really done. That was quick. I'll present it tonight.
It's on the agenda.
Oh,
Meeting adjourned, Kevin?
Yep, meeting adjourned. Thanks.
Boom.